Immortal and Martial Dual Cultivation. Chapter 6. Awakening of the Azure Dragon. The spiritual energy on the mountain was definitely much denser than below. In an instant, Xiao Chen could feel the vigorous spiritual energies gushing forth. The meridians that were widened by the Purple Thunder Divine Incantation were quickly filled. The spiritual energy circulated quickly in the 8 major meridians. Xiao Chen no longer dared to try and force the spiritual energy into the Dantian like the day before. Instead, he obediently used the spiritual energy to nourish his bones, skin, and muscles. He alternated between breathing in and out, and his breathing started to stabilize. He entered a state of nothingness, as though he had become one with the mountain range. This state was maintained for about 4 hours. The spiritual energy within a few hundred meters of Xiao Chen suddenly became agitated, and the boundless and majestic spiritual energy were frantically being drawn into Xiao Chen's body by an unknown force. Xiao Chen, who had entered a state of nothingness, was suddenly shocked by the situation. This spiritual energy was like a big river, unceasingly pouring into his body. The spiritual energy in his meridians became increasingly thick, causing Xiao Chen, who was already saturated with spiritual energy, to feel pain. If this went on for another hour, he would, without a doubt, explode and die. He could not control the circulation of the Purple Thunder Divine Incantation, which frantically continued to circulate by itself at a speed faster than usual by at least 2 folds. What was going on? A deep fear crept up into Xiao Chen's mind. Am I going to die like this? The surging spiritual energy continuously gushed into his body. He did his best to redirect the spiritual energy in his meridians to his bones, skins, and muscles. But he could not keep up with the rate of spiritual energy that was pouring into his body. His meridians were already starting to show some tiny cracks, and mixed in with the crack were some traces of blood. A strong wave of pain was sent to his brain. Xiao Chen grunted and nearly fainted from this pain. He sent his consciousness down, observing that his Dantian was still a formless mess. He clenched his jaw and decided to take a gamble. If this spiritual energy could not find an outlet, then he would explode and die soon. Only by successfully condensing his martial spirit could he refine the spiritual energy into essence. After making that decision, his consciousness immediately controlled the spiritual energy to smash against the Dantian. This spiritual energy was much stronger than the spiritual energy he used before. And just like before, when it got close to the Dantian, it stopped. However, this time, it did not bounce back. From the 3 major meridians of the chest, another wave of strong spiritual energy came and merged with the other, forming a stronger whole, and then with a bang, it slammed into it. It slammed into the barrier surrounding the Dantian. Xiao Chen vomited a mouthful of fresh blood, but the spiritual energy did not enter the Dantian. He did not believe that he could not break the barrier, but he tried for a few more times and inevitably failed. Xiao Chen started to get angry and continuously controlled the spiritual energy to smash against the barrier around the Dantian. However, after the 5th attempt, he had already vomited 5 mouthfuls of blood. This time, he could obviously feel the barrier soften. He felt joy in his heart, but instead of gathering the spiritual energy to attempt again, he took a deep breath and allowed the spiritual energy in his body to accumulate freely. In a short moment, the gathered spiritual energy was stronger than earlier. It surged under the control of Xiao Chen's consciousness and seemed to have turned into a flood dragon, snarling at the Dantian as it smashed against it. Boom! there was a loud boom that came from Xiao Chen's body. The barrier in the Dantian that had obstructed Xiao Chen's progress for 8 years was actually broken. He ignored the pain and sent his consciousness down, wanting to see what was causing the problem within his Dantian. A pair of eyes suddenly appeared and watched him. The eyes were like burning torches, showing a certain might. Xiao Chen felt like a big mountain was pressing down on him. In this place, he was like an ant, and the desire to worship this entity seemed to influence him. However, before he could be awed, an intense pain caused him to faint. When Xiao Chen fainted, the Purple Thunder Divine Incantation did not stop circulating, which meant that the surrounding spiritual energy still continuously poured into his body. Unlike before, this spiritual energy did not get absorbed into his flesh and bones. It was all gathered in his Dantian. The Dantian, which was originally a formless mess, seems to have dispersed, and inside it was a small, young, azure dragon. The eyes of the azure dragon were closed, and its 5 claws were slightly parted. It was greedily sucking in the spiritual energy that was pouring in, its 2 whiskers gently swaying. It seemed extremely comfortable, and its body rapidly swam around in circles, continuously sucking in spiritual energy. The soft skin of the azure dragon slowly hardened. However, its shape did not change. The surrounding spiritual energy slowly started to grow thin. Even places with denser spiritual energy would not be able to keep up with the rate the azure dragon was consuming it. Slowly, the surrounding spiritual energy was completely sucked dry, and the recovery of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth would require a long time. The azure dragon did not seem satisfied and continued to demand more. However, there was no more spiritual energy left in Xiao Chen's body. When he saw Xiao Chen's strong flesh, his body started to shrivel up. This azure dragon actually wanted to extract the spiritual energy within his flesh. The azure dragon continued to absorb for another hour before stopping, its azure skin turning even more solid and strong. It opened its eyes, extended its 5 claws, swam around in a lively fashion, and raised its head while releasing a ferocious roar as though it's been trapped for countless years and had finally seen daylight again. This ferocious roar came out of Xiao Chen's body, skyrocketing and piercing through the sky. The spirit beasts of the outer region of Seven Horn Mountain all prostrated in fear. This sound seemed to contain a mighty pressure, as though it was made to cause them to feel fear. At the same time, the Sackmaster of the Passionate Phoenix Palace, the White Emperor's City, and the Divine Martial Gate of Tianwu Continent all stopped what they were doing, and they looked into the distance, mumbling the same words. The Azure Dragon has awakened. At this moment, Xiao Chen finally woke up. The first thing he noticed were the changes to his body, which had shriveled up. However, he could not be bothered about this. He remembered that there had been a pair of mysterious eyes within his Dantian, which made him feel terrified. He quickly sat up into the lotus position and sent his consciousness into his Dantian. But he no longer saw the eyes, only a small azure dragon. There were a few white clouds floating in its surrounding, and his eyes were closed, silently waiting. What was going on? He had clearly seen a pair of eyes that contained a strong vigor and might, such that he would never forget it. Could this be the work of that little azure dragon?